Hello, and welcome to Classic Movie Recaps. Thank you for watching this video. Today, we're going to recap the classic film, Scarface. Directed by Brian De Palma, starring Al Pacino. Scarface is considered by many to be one of the greatest gangster crime films of all time, and tells the story of Tony Montana, a Cuban refugee, who arrives with nothing in Miami during the 80s and becomes a powerful and extremely homicidal drug lord. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. We open at the immigration checkpoint in Miami. We see a long line of refugees waiting to enter the United States. Among them is Tony Montana, a Cuban refugee with a scar on his cheek and a burning desire for success. After an intense interrogation, Tony is transferred into a crowded refugee camp as he is still considered an illegal immigrant and will have to wait for an outcome on whether he can enter the country or not. While in the camp, Tony meets his friend, Manny, who advises him that they can enter the United States if they obtain a green card, and someone is willing to guarantee them a green card if they can assassinate someone in the camp. The victim is someone of political importance and made a lot of enemies back in Cuba, so Tony is happy to do the job. Tony plans and executes the assassination flawlessly, by orchestrating a riot in the camp and assassinating the target during the commotion. The assassination is a success, so Tony and Manny are finally able to get out of the crowded refugee camp. Once Tony and Manny obtain their green cards, they are able to enter the United States and pay the bills by working as dishwashers at a food truck. Tony, however, is unhappy with his current circumstances, and expresses to Manny that this is not how he planned to live in the US. Manny advises him that he knows someone important who can get them work, and Tony sees an opportunity to make some real money. That someone is Omar Suarez, a mid-level drug dealer. Manny introduces Tony to Omar, who acts like a big shot and tries to give Tony a small-time job selling marijuana, but Tony declines as he has bigger ambitions. Instead, Tony encourages Omar to give him something better, so Omar sends them to purchase cocaine from Colombian dealers. Tony accepts the offer and soon brings along his friends, Angel and Chi-Chi, for some extra muscle. Once Tony arrives at the hotel where the drug deal is scheduled, Tony and Angel head to the room to meet the Colombians but are suspicious of the drug dealers. The Colombian tries to be friendly with Tony, but Tony is experienced and knows something's up. The Colombian asks about the money, then tries to rob Tony for the cash. Tony tries to use his gun, but both Tony and Angel are captured at gunpoint, and Tony is forced to watch Angel being dismembered with a chainsaw, before Manny and Chi-Chi rescue him. The three kill the Colombians and personally deliver the cocaine and money to Frank Lopez, suspecting that Omar set them up. Frank Lopez is a high-level drug dealer in Miami and is Omar's boss. Omar doesn't like the idea of Tony going over his head and approaching Frank, as Omar wants to take all the credit for the deal's success, but realizes he can't stop Tony. Tony enters the mansion of Frank Lopez to deliver the money and cocaine personally. The house is beautiful, and it is clear to Tony that Frank is doing extremely well in the drug business. Frank is pleased to meet Tony, and is surprised that he was able to collect the cocaine and keep the money, so Frank makes a toast over their recent win to celebrate. Frank invites Tony to work for him, and Tony accepts the offer, as this is a great opportunity for him to make some real money. During their meeting, Tony sees Frank's trophy wife, Elvira, and becomes attracted to her, but knows that dating the boss's wife is a bad idea, so he keeps it in his pants for now. Tony then makes a visit to his mother, who lives in a humble home, which is in stark contrast to the mansion Tony was in previously. Tony appears to be doing well, entering the house in a tailored suit, and he sees his sister, Gina, for the first time since entering the United States. Tony's mother, however, isn't pleased to see him, as she knows he's up to no good. Tony tries to lie and say that he is doing well, and is a legitimate businessman in Miami, but Tony's mother sees through his BS, and knows it is most likely the result of crime. Tony tries to give his mother and sister some money, but his mother refuses, and kicks him out of the house, as she did not want Tony to become a criminal. Tony leaves angrily, and Manny, who was waiting in the car outside, sees Gina, and becomes attracted to her. Tony notices Manny's attraction, and tells him to stay away from his sister, as Manny is a shameless womanizer. The next day, Frank sends Tony and Omar to Bolivia, to meet with cocaine kingpin, Alejandro Sosa. During the meeting, Tony shows his straight-to-the-point attitude and bravado, which charms Sosa. Tony then negotiates to purchase a larger amount of cocaine than is authorized by Frank, and Omar is unhappy that Tony made this deal without his approval. Omar sees Tony as an underling and wants Tony to stay in his place, but Tony is too ambitious. Sosa later has his men hang Omar from a helicopter and reveals that Omar was a snitch. Tony vouches for Frank's organization, so Sosa takes a liking to Tony and agrees to the deal, but warns Tony to never betray him. Upon returning to Miami, Tony has a meeting with Frank, who is furious that Omar is dead. He is also angry at Tony for agreeing to purchase more cocaine than he authorized, as he doesn't believe they can move the product, but Tony assures them that they need to expand, and that the money they make from the deal is huge. Frank, however, doesn't like the idea of expanding his business further, believing he won't be able to come up with the $18 million needed up front for the deal. Tony tries to assure Frank that if they're short on cash, he can make a few million on the street to get the amount together. But Frank advises that his competitors in the drug business won't tolerate Tony moving such a large amount of product as it cuts into their profits. Tony explodes and tells Frank that he doesn't care about the competitors and will kill them all, which unsettles Frank. After Tony's tirade, Frank sees that Tony is a liability and can't be kept on a leash, so he pretends to see things Tony's way, but then brings up Omar and questions why Tony believed Sosa when he told him that Omar was a police informant. Frank says he made a mistake sending Tony to Bolivia and insinuates that Tony and Sosa are conspiring together, agreeing to kill Omar so the deal could go through and Tony could come out on top. Frank then ends the argument by telling Tony to stall his deal with Sosa, and decides that he will not expand his drug enterprise. Tony agrees to Frank's order, but upon leaving, Frank tries to tell Tony to stay under the radar and not be too ambitious, so he can last in the drug business. Tony brushes off Frank's lesson, showing to Frank that Tony no longer respects him, and Frank now realizes that Tony is a liability. After Tony leaves the room, Frank calls a corrupt cop on his payroll, Mel Bernstein, to put the screws on Tony and get him out of the picture for good. Tony then goes to a nightclub with his friend Manny and is shocked to see his sister Gina on the dance floor. Tony is then confronted by Mel Bernstein, a corrupt DEA agent, who attempts to extort Tony, letting him know that he is aware of the drug deal gone wrong with the Colombians. Tony agrees to pay Bernstein in exchange for his protection from the police. Then Tony, already unsettled from dealing with Bernstein, sees his sister Gina flirting with a man and beats him up, warning his sister not to do it again. Gina feels that Tony is overprotective and leaves the club in a mess. Tony then takes a seat at the table and tries to relax, while two hitmen watch him from across the dance floor. It is a tense scene, as Tony is unaware of the impending attack. The two hitmen then open fire, attempting to kill him with machine guns, spraying Tony's general area with bullets. The people in the club scream and rush for the doors to escape, while gunfire flies across the club. Tony gets shot, but the wound isn't fatal, so Tony pulls out his pistol and shoots the attackers from under the table, then quickly escapes the club in his car. Meanwhile, Manny drops off Gina back to her place, and Gina questions why Manny hasn't asked her out. Manny gets angry and tells Gina that Tony is like his brother, and that they could never be together, fearing what Tony would do if he found out they were in a relationship. Tony, still injured from the attempt on his life, goes with Manny and his friend Chi-Chi to visit Frank, suspecting that he is responsible for the assassination attempt in the club, and Mel Bernstein is in Frank's office, cementing Tony's suspicions that Frank set him up to be killed. Frank pretends to be surprised about the hit, and promises Tony that they will take revenge on whoever is responsible, but Tony sees through Frank's BS. It is now clear that Tony is in charge, as he sits at the head of the table, with Frank cowering in front of him. Tony then kills Frank, and Bernstein tries to pretend he had nothing to do with the hit. Tony put 2 and 2 together though, and doesn't fall for Bernstein's BS, so Tony kills him on the spot. As they are about to leave, Manny notices Frank's bodyguard, Ernie, who is still present in the room. Tony then offers him a job, because Ernie never did anything wrong to Tony. Ernie is relieved that he will not be killed and accepts the job, drinking a bottle of liquor after the event to calm his nerves. Lucky Ernie. Tony then takes over Frank's organization, and finally marries Elvira. After settling in, the deal with Sosa goes through and Tony is now the sole distributor of Sosa's product, earning him millions of dollars and helping him expand Frank's business into a multi-million-dollar drug empire, which Tony uses to organize the construction of a beautiful mansion on a large, heavily guarded estate. Tony, now making an obscene amount of drug money, attempts to launder the money through a real estate company but isn't aware it is a sting operation. Tony is caught red-handed and is arrested. Tony is soon released on bail with a bond of $5 million and has a meeting with his lawyer, who is the best lawyer in Miami. Tony's lawyer explains that he faces 5 years in prison if found guilty, however he could have the time reduced to 3 years with good behavior. Manny tries to get him to accept the jail time but Tony refuses, saying that he's been to prison before and he's never going back. Tony offers the lawyer more money, and asks him to bribe some high-level government officials to make the charges go away, but the lawyer explains that Tony was caught on tape, so there's no chance of him walking away scot-free. Tony is then invited by Sosa to visit Bolivia for a meeting, regarding an issue they're having with an activist investigating their business. Tony is introduced to several government officials, and throughout the meeting it becomes evident that Tony is just another assassin, and that the officials in the meeting are big time, compared to Tony. He's just a big fish in a small pond back in Miami. Sosa advises that they are aware of Tony's tax issues, and if he can help them with an assassination on an investigator into their activities, they can guarantee that he does no jail time. The investigator is an activist who is about to publish an exposé on Sosa's drug activities, which will expose both Sosa and the Bolivian and U.S. government officials who are involved. Tony accepts the offer to assassinate the investigator with the help of Sosa's right-hand man, Umberto, so Tony and Sosa's henchmen travel to New York City to carry out the assassination. Umberto plants a radio-controlled bomb under the activist's car, but Tony tries to call off the hit, as the activist's wife and children are in the car. Tony may be a crazy murdering drug dealer, but he has his morals. When Umberto refuses to back down, Tony kills him in the car before he can detonate the bomb. This is a bad move however, as the investigator into Sosa's activities will now publish the exposé. Tony returns to Miami after failing the hit, where an enraged Sosa calls him, and tells him that he warned Tony not to mess with him. Sosa promises retribution for allowing the activist to deliver the exposé, and Tony responds enraged, so Sosa hangs up. This is a pivotal moment in the film, because it marks the beginning of Tony's downfall, as Sosa is extremely well connected and powerful, and will not hesitate to send an army to kill Tony. Tony then goes to meet his mother at her home, who is trying to track down Gina. Tony's mother is upset with Tony, as she believes Tony has had a negative influence on her, ever since he arrived in Miami. Tony leaves his mother's home and attempts to track down Gina. Tony goes to Manny's house so Manny can assist in the search for Gina and possibly inform him of their trouble with Sosa. However, Gina comes out to see who's at the door, standing at the top of the stairs, looking very happy, but upon realizing that Manny and Gina are in a relationship, Tony becomes enraged, and shoots Manny in the stomach. Gina is horrified and rushes downstairs to Manny, while Tony stands at the door. Gina yells in tears that they were married, and Tony stands still, shocked at his actions, having killed his best friend and brother-in-law. Ernie then enters the house and advises Tony that they have to leave the area, as the sound of the shot will raise suspicion, and Ernie leaves with Tony, dragging Gina to the car. Tony then returns to his mansion, and depressed at the state of his current situation, goes on a massive cocaine binge. Tony deeply regrets killing Manny, and begins having a panic attack at his desk, trying to calm himself down with more cocaine. Gina then enters the room, and distraught over the death of Manny, has a psychotic episode. Gina tries to seduce Tony, saying that he won't let her have any man, so he should have her instead, but it's a trap, and Gina attempts to kill Tony, shooting him in the leg. During the commotion however, Sosa's men have arrived, and one of them climbs through the back door, opening fire with an Uzi, killing Gina. Tony tackles the assassin, and pushes him off the balcony, into the pool below. Meanwhile, Sosa's main force begin raiding the estate, and rush through the front doors of the mansion, killing everybody, including Chi-Chi. Tony tends to Gina's lifeless body but sees Chi getting killed through his security monitors, and instantly jumps up to grab his gun, an AR-15 assault rifle with a grenade launcher attached, and begins to mow down Sosa's assassins.
Say hello to my little friend! Okay, you wanna play rough? Okay.
Tony takes out Sosa's men one by one, getting shot multiple times in the process, until he stands on the top of the stairway, shouting obscenities and taunting the remaining attackers who are taking cover from the grenade explosions. Sosa's men then emerge from positions and enriddle Tony with bullets, forcing him to drop his gun, but Tony remains standing. Tony is so affected by the cocaine that he is seemingly invincible as he doesn't feel any pain. He continues to taunt his attackers into shooting him, which they do, as Tony stands there taking all the damage to his body. It is at this moment that an assassin slowly approaches Tony from behind, shooting him in the back with a shotgun, causing Tony to fall through the railing and into the small pool below. Tony has finally been killed. The assassin looks down below at Tony's body floating in the pool, and the camera shows a globe statue with the words, "The world is yours" across it, which was Tony's mantra. Scarface initially received negative reviews when released due to its graphic violence, profanity and drug use. The film also faced criticism over its depiction of Cubans in Miami, as mass immigration from Cuba into Miami was a real event. The Mariel boat lift, in which the Cuban government, under the orders of dictator Fidel Castro, allowed anyone to leave the country, including many prisoners, who would mix among the genuine refugees seeking asylum.
No he podido sacarla del país. 21 años enterrado en vida y ahora pudimos lograr salir de ella para vivir feliz.
El chamaquito mío, el hijo mío, me lo quitaron porque se enfermó y no lo dejaron salir. No, que tenía vómito y eso, y la señora mía, pues como está aquello allí que no se puede estar, pues ella prefirió mejor quedarse que no, para seguir trabajando, pasando trabajo allí.
Despite this film painting a gritty picture on a social issue at the time, the film later gained status as a classic. To this day, Scarface is regarded as one of the greatest films in the gangster crime genre and is regarded by many to be among the greatest films of all time. Thank you for watching the video. If you've enjoyed, please like, comment and subscribe to see more classic movie recaps. Have a fantastic day.